Welcome to class one of this drawing class. I'm not exactly. I don't have a title. I don't have like a working title going on here, but um, so just to kind of give you guys an idea of what the expectation should be for what you're gonna get out of this class. Um, the basic idea is we're gonna go over form first off. We're gonna go over technique secondly, and thirdly we're gonna go over just kind of general understanding of lighting and anatomy. Um, by the end of this, you should be able to do a fairly decent job of rendering out a simple shape and/or a basic human form. That's going to be kind of the end goal here, so that you can be able to do um, the essentials of what drawing requires, which is to take a form that is non-existent and be able to create something that is a passable facsimile for it on a two-dimensional plane. Um, to do that, the biggest thing that we're going to be learning about is value, and how value itself is the most important tool that you have as an artist. So on the screen here, you might see here that I have rendered a cube. Now, obviously I could spend a lot more time on this. I could actually just use solid colors since I'm drawing digitally, but I prefer to do it using traditional technique. So what I've done here is a type of shading that's known as hatching. So I've gone through and I've just done very thin, small lines over and over and over in the same direction, and making sure that they are as straight as possible, or at the very least following the same direction, as to give it the look of a solid color. And that is a very basic shading technique. I prefer it because it's very quick and easy to do. But if I were to remove the lines from this cube, you should be able to tell it's a cube. The idea of shadow and value give your brain the information that it requires in order to tell what a shape is. So that is something that's important, because when you're drawing people especially, you use a lot of shorthand for that visual cue. I was talking with Mike a bit earlier about this the other day, but when you're drawing things like a nose, anytime that you see a nose, what you're seeing, usually you see something like this, right? That is what somebody draws to represent a nose. And why did they do that? Well, there's no line there, but you have a heavy shadow usually right here where it's overlapping on top of something like the other eye, where it comes kind of over here, and then you have kind of a bunch of shadow up here. It comes down here. You usually have a bit of a shadow that kind of comes like this. You have a pretty heavy shadow for the nostril that kind of comes forward like this. You usually have a little bit of a nasolabial crease right here, where you got that kind of like this. Then you got this kind of like here, and then usually you have a little bit of something like this, where it comes down like this, and then this is enshadowed over here, and that forms a nose. But you don't need to show all that shadow to show a nose, because your brain is simplifying it for you. So when you draw a line and it looks like this, I don't have to flesh out the full nose. All I have to do is draw the lines. And that's kind of what I'm going to try to help to get your brains into the idea of thinking about. Why does, when you look at something and you see a very simple shape like this with lines, how is it that your brain can understand that it's supposed to be a three-dimensional object? How is it that it understands perspective? So that's what we're going to be trying to focus on for this particular class, all right? One of the first things that we're going to work on is we're going to do a cube. So cubes are super simple, unless you're really bad at drawing straight lines. But you just kind of want to go through and you just kind of want to feel out a square. And then behind it, you just want to take, I mean, and you can do this at any angle that you want. I'm not really worried about perspective right now. I'm more worried about the shape that you're making. So you just kind of do like this, like this, like this, and now you have a cube or a rectangle or whatever particular. I mean, you can make it an elongated cube, it doesn't really matter. So I would like for each of you to draw a few cubes, different variations, different sizes, different shapes. They don't all have to be going into the same perspective. Like, you could draw one where you're mostly looking at it, and it's actually coming down like this and forward. So you're actually kind of in the middle of it on the perspective plane. You can have one where the corner is actually coming towards you. Like so. You can have one where the top of the cube is being presented to you in perspective as well. Anything works. Anything goes in this, as long as it's some kind of three-dimensional cube. All right? And the next step for that is going to be to apply some shading to it. So for most of these, you're going to want to do the very basic one side fairly dark. I'm just doing some very quick shading here because we don't have all night. So we got this, and then slightly less shading on that side. So now there's some depth to it. You can tell that something's going on here, right? And after we go through, I want you guys to try to do at least 5 cubes, just, you know, to get the hang of trying to render out a three-dimensional object, to kind of give you the idea of how to work in your headspace with creating something that's three-dimensional on the two-dimensional plane. We're going to move on to spheres. A sphere, obviously, is a circle. And that is not a great circle. We're just going to pretend like I did a really good circle to begin with, and you're all going to ignore that, all right? But a good trick for circles as well is, if you can't do a perfect circle, which obviously most people can't, you can do it in small, more controlled lines, and then go around, and then once you've got kind of a guideline, you can use that to kind of flesh out your circle if you're having a hard time doing a fairly round object right off the bat. I don't expect a lot of you to have great pen control right off the bat, or pencil control, or whatever you're using to draw right now. That's something that you learn. That's something that you learn over the course of doing it a lot. But let's just say, for example, that we've got a sphere, right? And just because it's the easiest thing, we're going to go ahead and say that our light source is here, right? And we're going to say that our floor is here, just to make it as simple as possible. So this is going to get into a little bit of perspective and how to cast shadows. Cast shadows are important because they let you understand how light is going to fall over a map or a face or whatever you're doing that requires you to have something that casts a light block. So we're going to go here. We're going to draw a line from there to there. I recommend, if you're drawing digitally, by creating a single dot on the page and holding shift, it gives you the ability to use an anchor line. So you can create a straight line, a perfectly straight line from anywhere, and all you have to do is tap on the line and it will finish it with your brush. So we're going to do 2 anchor lines. And actually, we're going to pull this down a little bit so it's actually level with that. We're going to do 2 anchor lines, and we're going to go boop right there. So what this gives us is an idea of where the bottom of the shadow is. So this is going to be the end of the shadow, because this is where the light intersects the top of the sphere. This is where the light intersects the bottom. So it's going to start from here and go to here. But how wide is it? Okay, so the wide part of the sphere is going to be cast from, obviously, the widest part of the sphere. So you go from your light source, and what's the widest part of a sphere, everyone? it's the equator on this particular case because we're actually talking about the middle of this on a north-south hemisphere. So you draw your line going across your hemisphere or your equator, right? So now we have kind of this idea where, okay, this shadow kind of comes out like this, kind of comes out like this, and like this. Now you can't see the other side very well. But if you just map it out like so, and the best way to do this, and I will honestly tell you the best way to do this is go find some pictures of spheres and just try your best to render them out. But what we've got now here is just by adding a little bit of contact shadow and a cast shadow, I've told your eyes that that is a ball. I don't even have to fill it in. It can just be a perfectly white sphere with no other shadowing on it, and your eyes are perceiving it as a ball because it has a cast shadow. There's some kind of interaction. You can now tell that there is a surface here. There's not just a blank void. There's a flat area that's casting a shadow onto. Right? And in turn, as you come through here, you can start to render the shadow on the ball. Now, how do you do that? Well, usually you use lots of little tiny lines, or you can cheat and use a larger airbrush or something like that. I really don't care how you achieve the look. The look is what's the most important. How you get there isn't as important to me. All right? So we know that the line for this is intersecting right here, so we know that our core shadow is going to fall underneath this. So we have this hemisphere like this, right? So we're going to come through here, we're going to continue to shade around, continue to shade around. Kind of coming around here, giving it a bit more definition over here, really making it black down here. Anybody who knows what the term ambient occlusion means knows why this is important. Does anyone know what ambient occlusion means? Ambient occlusion is a term that refers to objects being close to each other. So if you have two objects that are near each other, there's going to be what's known as an absence of light. So light wouldn't be able to hit certain areas because there's another object that's too close to it to be able to get the light in there. You see it a lot in video games. If you turn ambient occlusion off, objects that are closer to each other than they're not have no shadowing, but when you have it on, you see relationships between the different objects more closely. So when something is sitting on a table, you see a heavier shadow sitting underneath it. Or if you have a car with a tire on the ground, there's heavy shadowing near the tire of the car because ambient occlusion says that that crux where the tire is meeting or towards where the tire is meeting the ground, there couldn't possibly be any light because it's too close to each other. So you get that effect especially on a sphere, so that you get a really dark shadow right there that would then feather out very quickly into not as intense of a shadow down there. But up here you have a massive core shadow which comes down here, and it would get much darker on this side. But that's just because, you know, the light is on the other side of it, right? And always make sure that you're shading, you're feathering it into itself. Very, very, very rarely with a spheroid do you have a what's known as a hard shadow or a hard cast shadow. That just doesn't usually happen on spheres, because they have rounder surfaces. They have something where it's going to bend the light slowly over it. And then on the top here, you just want to have very, very light. Very, very light. Because the light, obviously, right here, this is going to be a bright spot. That's an excellent point. Thank you for making it. But that right there is just a very quick example. Obviously, I can go further into it over time. But another quick way to render any of these things is to take just a regular brush. Well, maybe not with the light. Hang on. There we go. But you just create a sphere, and then you just kind of take a lighter color of it. And then you just kind of take like a white. And you just, you know, I mean, it's definitely not a difficult thing to try to render a basic spheroid. You're just creating a drastic highlight, usually combined with a very dark shadow. So I would like everybody to try to do at least a couple of spheres as well. Again, I don't care how you manage to make them, just make them look good. The idea is that we want to try to do as close to a, I don't want to say photorealism, but we don't want to do, we're not working on stylized stuff right now. Style development is something that is more something that you would take on over the course of when you're actually drawing things, how you decide to simplify the techniques that we're learning here. Now, you're going to see a lot of my style in all of this because obviously my style exists. But the goal here is so that you can learn the basics of how to render these things so that you can develop your style when you get to that point. So, I'm going to very quickly go over, but yeah, so let's go over some basic 1-point perspective. And we'll see how much I remember perspective. So, 1-point perspective, you always have a single vanishing point. Now, a vanishing point is it's where all lines in an image converge. So it's where shape ceases to exist, basically. So in this particular instance, we're going to put our horizon line right here. I'm going to make it a nice, semi-decent sized dot right there so you guys can see it, all right? So if this is where every line converges in a scene, when we're drawing, we want to start from here out, right? So we're going to put a line right there, and we're going to put a line right there, okay? Now, that is right now just an infinity shape going out into the vast abyss of nothingness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to put a straight line directly up and down. One thing to know about 1-point perspective, every single up and down line, as well as every single vertical line, so any line that goes this way or this way is going to be perfectly straight. It's either going to be at 0-degree angle or it's going to be at a 90-degree angle. They do not have any other options because in perspective, everything's up and down, straight, flat, and then you have the lines going out into it. Now, you can draw things that aren't on those lines in perspective, but that's when you start adding in 2-point perspective. So, in 1-point perspective, all your lines will meet here, right? So I'm going to create another line, and we're going to have it go over here. I'm going to create another line. We're going to have it go over here. I'm going to have another line that goes over here. I'm going to have another line that goes over here. And then I'm going to come over here. We're going to do another straight line directly up like this. And then I'm going to have a line that goes directly across like this. And then we're going to start taking out some of these extraneous lines that we don't need. So I've mapped out all this stuff here, right? But you'll note, now that I've taken out some of these longer lines, what is this starting to look like? looks like a street. You know, you get some of these buildings, and then let's say we do some more vanishing point lines here, right? And then you can start building out things like windows on these things. And you know, I dare say that these windows are in perspective. And if you follow the rules, this is always going to be a straight line going in like this. Follow your perspective line across, right? And now you have the interior of your windows in perspective. So that's how one point perspective works. You have a single line and you pull all of your perspective lines from that singular point. And from there you can create entire scenes where everything falls into the same level of perspective because everything is in the same level of perspective. So we can get this right here. But the trick is, of course, you have to make sure that everything is straight up and down. Otherwise, you really do lose it. And now I would also recommend, I'm doing all this on the same layer. If you're doing this, what I would highly recommend is to do it on a separate layer. And that way you can do it in a different color. So usually you want to do perspective lines in a very bright color, like you want to use like a neon green or something like this, so that when you're coming out, you can see what you're doing underneath it, but it's still visible on the screen. And that way you can draw your stuff underneath it in black, and then you just switch layers over to the other layer, and then you can erase your perspective lines when you're done. All right, fine, we're going to do 2-point perspective. It's going to be very simple, though, because I don't really want to get into it too much. So 2-point perspective essentially says that you have an object that is intersecting two different vanishing points. So we're going to create a basic cube in 2-point perspective. Okay? So for this, we're going to do this, and the same rule applies in regards to lines always are straight up and down. All right? And then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. So that is a 2-point perspective box. It is very rudimentary. But if I go over here, and I'm just going to very quickly do all the lines in black here. Two-point perspective. That's obviously a very, very sharp perspective right now. That is, you would normally not have an object that is that in perspective. But there are things that you could do with this level of perspective. If you were to take this and say, let's do a couple of like upward things like this, and then one over here as well, and then one over here, right? Now, by themselves, none of that makes any sense, but I can now say that I want to draw a line over to here, follow this perspective, and everything, of course, should be going towards this if it's part of the perspective, but I don't want that to be part of that perspective line, so I'm just going to draw my line freehand at this point. But now I can use these lines here, these guidelines that I created, that should be in perspective, because they should be in the same level as the box. Yeah, go wait, there we go. Like so. And then we'll do like this. Oh, that's the wrong line. This is why you should always, always, always not do what I'm doing, but do it better. Because you want to make sure that you don't draw over your same perspective lines. But now you see it's a box. And all it took was a couple extra perspective lines and a little bit of erasing. Also, we want to do a back like that. Make sure that in perspective they wouldn't be crossing. They might actually be crossing, so yeah, we would want to have. And how do you find out if they're crossing? Well, you come down here and you draw to that corner and you say, yep. From there to there, and from there to the bottom of the corner that was over here, which was right here, that is actually where it would be crisscrossing in the back there. So from here, we got to go from here over to here, and from here, from here over to here, and then erase that. Box. Perfect for sits. I would like to see extra credit for anybody if you do try to do anything within 2-point or 1-point perspective. Make sure that if you do that, try and make sure that you use. If you're using paper and pencil, just use a ruler. Honestly, just use a ruler to make straight lines, just very light straight lines, and that will save you a lot of heartache. Because trying to do straight lines by eye is impossible. But if you do it, try your best to keep those lines on there so that I can see them, and we can go over it and we'll talk about it at that point. But yeah, overall, that was pretty much all the material I really had to go over for the first one. I didn't really want to do perspective so much, but because we weren't doing the real-time drawing with me on the canvas thing like I had planned, I ran out of material really fast. So I don't want to overload you. I don't want to try to make this something where you're going to be going in and going, holy shit, I have no idea where to go from here. So we're going to start with some very, very simple shapes, trying to render shadows and maybe some perspective. I don't expect anyone's perspective to be good. My perspective isn't even good. So bear that in mind when you're looking at it, you know. That's it. That's everybody. Thanks for attending my TED Talk.